The gift of life is surely the greatest gift of all. So how could the story of a remarkable woman who gave that gift over and over again have been overlooked for so long? Here's Jim Axelrod now to set the record straight.
Somewhere in this humble family cemetery off a country road in the town of Clover in Southern Virginia, a woman who died nearly 60 years ago lies in an unmarked grave, which is a shame because the world should know her name, Henrietta Lacks.
Who is Henrietta Lacks?
Yeah, I mean, she was a poor African-American tobacco farmer, mother of 5 kids, who died when she was 31 of cervical cancer, and was one of the most important sort of unknown figures in medicine and she had no idea.
Rebecca Skloot, a professor at the University of Memphis, devoted 10 years to telling her story, writing the current bestseller, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
This was the last home of her life.
Yeah.
The story starts near the end of Henrietta's life. Baltimore, 1950. The great-granddaughter of slaves, Henrietta was being treated for cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Without her knowing, and unrelated to her treatment, doctors took some of her cells for research.
So she went to Hopkins, 30 years old, and she happened to walk into Hopkins at a time when scientists were trying to grow human cells and culture and were taking cells from anybody they could.
By the late 1940s, scientists were on the brink of a golden age of medicine. Jonas Salk was racing to develop the polio vaccine. But his work, and that of countless others, was hampered because they lacked a critical tool, human cells for testing. Scientists had been trying for years to keep human cells alive in the lab, but none of them lasted very long, until Henrietta Lacks showed up at Hopkins.
With her under anesthesia, they just took this small piece of her tumor without her knowing, and they put it in a dish and sent it down the hall to George Guy, who was the head of tissue culture research at Hopkins. And he'd been trying to grow human cells for decades, and it had never worked. And hers just took off.
Took off doesn't begin to describe it. For the first time in history, human cells could be grown and infinitely replicated outside the body. Henrietta Lacks died in October 1951, just 8 months after seeking help at Hopkins. But her cells lived on, multiplying by the billions.
Why? What was there specific to Henrietta Lacks, her cells?
We know mechanically that the cells stay alive because they have this enzyme in them that rebuilds the ends of their chromosomes. So the cells just never get old. They don't die. But why her cells did that when all the other cells didn't is still a little bit of a mystery.
To this day, HeLa cells, named by combining the first 2 letters of Henrietta with the first 2 of Lacks, are a cornerstone of modern medicine.
Tick off for me all the ways HeLa cells have been used.
To tick off all the way HeLa cells have been used, we would be sitting here for weeks. Like hundreds and thousands of studies. They were used to help test the polio vaccine so that it could be approved for use in people. They went up in the first space missions to see what would happen to human cells in 0 gravity. Hers were the first cells ever cloned, some of the first genes ever mapped. They've been used to create drugs from, some of our basic cancer drugs like tamoxifen. I mean, the range of things that HeLa cells has been used for is kind of incomprehensible.
So it's hard to imagine science in the last half a century without HeLa cells.
Oh yeah, HeLa is special, and scientists who come to my talks and things, they come up to me and they say, you cannot overestimate how important HeLa cells have been.
You do remember your mother getting sick?
Yeah. But I didn't know exactly what it were then because nobody never told me.
Lawrence Lacks, the oldest of Henrietta's 5 children, wasn't the only one left in the dark. No one in the family had been informed by Johns Hopkins of the existence of their mother's cells until a researcher called in the early 1970s wanting to test the family.
Henrietta's husband basically got a phone call one day, and the way he understood it was, we've got your wife, she's alive in the laboratory, we've been doing research on her for the last 25 years. The only cell he'd ever heard of was the kind in a prison. I mean, he literally thought, okay, so they have her in a cell, they have part of her in a cell.
The news left the Lacks family confused and scared.
When you look at this in the context of the family story, you know, 25 years after her death, not only were her cells still alive, but there were enough of them that if you could pile them all on a scale, they'd weigh 50 million metric tons. It's like 150 Empire State Buildings. You know, it's just inconceivable that that could even be true, and it was.
I almost feel raped, like the family feels raped. You know, they did it and nobody told it.
From my sitting in that living room last night, my sense was the devil in all of this is Johns Hopkins University for the family.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. For the family, the devil, yeah. For the family, Johns Hopkins is absolutely the bad guy.
Johns Hopkins needs to do a better job of communicating with the family and recognizing it.
Dr. Daniel Ford is a vice dean at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Using Henrietta's cells for research, he maintains, was standard practice for the time.
Well, I think if we go back to that time and compare it to now, there was probably more of a focus on the science and discovery with less consideration of what it meant to that individual that was going to be part of the scientific process, whether they knew it or not.
The hospital is working on acknowledging the Lacks family, but it's a tricky situation.
The reason why is, although the Henrietta Lacks case is the one that we're talking about and has the highest profile, that is not the only patient that has contributed to the research agenda of Johns Hopkins or the nation. So one of the issues is talking about precedent, and what does that mean?
What that means, among other things, is money. And while Hopkins claims it never sold HeLa cells, the same can't be said for medical supply companies.
Is there any way to calculate how much money has been made off of Henrietta Lacks' cells?
No. I mean, they were the first cells ever commercialized, and that was in the 50s. And you can buy online HeLa cells or products made using HeLa cells from anywhere from about $200 for a vial up to about $10,000 a vial. HeLa cells are still, you know, one of the most widely used cells in the world, so...
But it's an incalculable amount of money.
Yeah.
And consider this. The family of the woman whose cells changed medical history can't afford health insurance. Henrietta's middle child, Sonny, is $100,000 in debt after bypass surgery.
How does that leave you feeling?
It leaves me feeling kind of not angry a little bit that I don't have the medical coverage, and then that my mother's cells being used all over the world for science purpose, and then the medical coverage that we have is zero, me and my brother.
No medical coverage, no money, and one more thing the Lacks family and Henrietta have gone without: recognition.
We talk about Hopkins. You know, Hopkins have a wing for this here and a wing for that. It would be nice if Hopkins would have a Henrietta Lacks wing.
Well, but one thing I'm going to say is that I think it's wrong. Out of all that money they made off my mother, she down there in Virginia in an unmarked grave.
This is one grave right here with it.
At least that's about to change.
The monument, I just put Henrietta Lacks monument right here.
Just last week, Henrietta's family learned of the exact spot where their mother was buried, next to her mother, Eliza Pleasant, in the shade of an old oak. A donated headstone will be placed there come spring.
They used to tell me stories about my mother. You know, she was very...
Your mother was a giver.
Giver, yes. She was a giver. And she's still doing it. You know, and she's still giving. The thing about it just makes me feel good that my mother has contributed so much, and it's being known that Henrietta Lacks is still living today.